Grey King by Susan Cooper won the Golden Harp. Fire on the Mountain. There was not much smoke, for so much fire, in a line along the lower slope of the mountain, which they could only just see above the hedge from where they stood. Flames were blazing in the bracken. It was like a long wound, a gash in the peaceful brown slope, quivering with deadly ominous life. Yet there was a little color in it, and they were too far away to hear any sound. For a moment Will was conscious only of wonder that John Rowland should have caught sight of it at all. Then they were deep in instructions, and the urgency of Rowland's soft voice. "Off to the farm, both of you, quick. Call the fire from town, the police, and then come back with anyone who is there, all the hands you can get, and bring more fire brooms. Bran, you know where they are. Come on, Owen." Both men ran up the path across the valley, and the boys dived for the gate that led over the fields to Clude Farm. Bran swung his head round in a whirl of white hair. "Take it gently now," he said earnestly, "or you'll be worse ill." And he was off like a sprinter, leaving Will to close the gate and trot resignedly in his wake. The telephoning was done by the time he caught Bran up at the farm. David Evans took them with him in the Land Rover, with Reese and a tall, thin farmer called Tom Ellis, who had been there. When they arrived, the back of the little car had been hastily filled with fire brooms and sacking, and several buckets that Will's uncle seemed to have small hope of using. The dogs, for once, were left behind. "They will do no good with fire," Reese said, seeing Will cock his head at the plaintive barking, "and the sheep can get out of the way on their own. Indeed, they will all be well anyway by now." "I wonder where Cavil is," Will said, and then caught sight of Bran's face and wished he had not. Close to, the fire on the mountain was very much more alarming than it had seemed from a distance. They could smell it now and hear it, smell the smoke more bitter than a farm bonfire, hear the soft, dreadful sound of flames consuming the bracken, like paper crumpled in the hand, and the sudden crackling roar of a bush or a patch of gorse went up. And they could see the flames leaping high, bright red and yellow, at the edges of the fire, but ferocious and near invisible at its heart. As they tumbled out of the car, David Evans was yelling for the fire brooms. Will and Bran pulled them out. Besoms made like those for old-fashioned sweeping, but with twigs longer and wider spread. John Rowland's and Bran's father, already equipped, were thrashing at the leading edge of the fire, trying to contain it, but the wind was gusting higher, and the flames, now leaping, now creeping, were soon past them and traveling along the lower edge of the mountain. As they swept upwards, roaring up the hillside through the tinder-dry bracken, Owen Davies jumped out of the way only just in time. The crackling rose. The air was full of fumes and smoke, and whirling back black specks of charcoal and ash. Great heat shone out of them. They were all in a line, beating at the flames, flailing away with all their might, yet only occasionally extinguishing a spark. John Rowland shouted something desperately in Welsh, then seeing Will's uncomprehending face near him, gasped out, "We must drive it higher, before it can reach Pritchard's. Keep it from the rock." Peering ahead at the great out-sweeping rocky slope of Craig Yarden, Will glimpsed for the first time the corner of a grey stone building jutting out beyond its far side. The light glinted on a spray of water flung up beside the house. Someone was soaking the land all round it in an effort to deaden the fire if it should reach that far. But Will, beating hopelessly with his long, flat-tipped broom, felt that nothing could halt or check the inferno before them, snarling high over their heads now as it reached a tangle of blackberry bushes. It was like a huge beast raging over the mountain, gobbling up everything in its path with irresistible greed. It was so powerful, and they so small, that even the effort to control its path seemed ludicrous. He thought, "It is like the dark," and for the first time found himself wondering how the fire could have begun. Below them, from the road past the foot of the great crag, came the clanging of a fire engine's bell, and Will glimpsed patches of bright red through the trees and a hose snaking through the air. Men's voices were calling faintly, and there was a sound of engines. But up here on the slope, the fire was gaining a greater hold as the gusting wind caught it in patches, and gradually they were forced downward into the trees edging the road. In triumphant thunder, the fire roared after them. "Down the road," the thin man Tom Ellis called. "Those trees will catch in a minute." Will panted along at John Rawlins' side. "What will happen?" "Burn itself out eventually," but the Welshman's creased face was grim. Bran came trotting up at his other side, his white skin smudged and dirty. "This wind is the trouble, taking it up the valley. Is Pritchard's place really in danger, Mr. Rawlins?" John Rawlins checked his stride for a moment to gaze all round the sky. Clouds were forming in the blue air now, strange, ragged, dirty white clouds that seemed to be coming from no one direction. "I don't know. The wind is for a change in the weather, and it's shifting, but hard to tell where. We shall have rain sooner or later." "Well," said Will hopefully, "the rain will put the fire out, won't it?" But as he spoke, he could hear the crackle and roar of the fire like laughter at his back, and he was not surprised when John Rowland shook his head. "Only a great deal of rain. The ground is so dry as it never is at this time of year. As it never is this time of year. Nothing but a downpour will have any effect at all." He looked round again, frowning at the mountain and the sky. "Something is strange about this fire and everything. Something is wrong." He shook his shoulders, giving up the search, and strode on ahead as they rounded a bend and came toward the fire engine and its thundering, thrumming engine. Will thought, "Ah, John Rawlins, you see more than you think you see, though not quite enough. The Dark Lord has begun his work in these mountains. The Grey King is building up a wall to enclose the Golden Harp, and the sleepers who must be wakened, so that I may not come to them and fulfill the quest. For if he can keep them from the reach of the light, then the old ones will not come into their full power, and there will be none to keep the dark from rising." He said without knowing that he spoke aloud, "But it won't work." A voice said softly in his ear, "What won't work?" Bran's dark, smoky spectacles, shrouding the eyes behind, were staring into his face. Will looked at him and said with sudden naked honesty, "I don't know what to make of you." "I know you don't," Bran said, a quirk of a smile twitching his strange pale face. "But you're going to need me all the same." He spun round as smoke from the fire up the hillside came billowing down around them. "Don't worry," he said, gritting. "Nobody else has ever known what to make of me either." And he was off, spinning, running, almost dancing up the road toward the fire engine. Will ran after him, and then in a moment both of them were brought up short by the sight of a sight more astonishing than any yet. Beneath the looming bulk of Craig Adran, the firemen had two hoses playing, drenching both the mountain and the side of the road with an effort to check the fire from leaping over the crag and down to Pritchard's farm. Others ran here and there with buckets, fire brooms, anything with which stray sparks might be drowned or beaten out before they gained a hold. The road was buzzing with anxious activity, yet in the midst of it all, standing rigid and oblivious with fury, stood Caradog Pritchard, his red hair bristling, blood on his shirt, and a shotgun leveled in one hand, and the other hand outrigged, pointing an accusation as he screamed with rage at John Rowlands. "Bring me the dog! Bring him! I will prove to you that it was him! Him and that freakish white hound of the freak boy! I will show you. 6 sheep in my field. There are 6 of them.